Good morning. I'm Council President Johnson. I'm going to call this meeting of the Executive Committee to order. I'm joined by Council Vice President Elizabeth Glidden, Council Member Cam Gordon, and Council Member Kevin Reich, and we're a quorum of the Executive Committee. Good morning. We've got a couple items on our agenda. So Ms. Nelms, first one.
Yes, good morning, members of the Executive Committee. Today I'm here to request that you give approval for us to submit the Pay Equity Implementation Report to the state of Minnesota. The Pay Equity Implementation Report is required by Local Government Pay Equity Act, and then I request that you refer that to Ways and Means and ultimately full council for approval. This request is for submission of the data that was basically in effect for December 31st, 2014. So it's a sampling and a reflection of the 2014 data, even though it's called the 2015 Implementation Report. In 1984, the Minnesota legislature enacted the Local Government Pay Equity Act, requiring states' political subdivisions to establish equitable compensation relationships between male and female-dominated job classifications of similar value. The law requires each jurisdiction to submit a pay equity implementation report to the Minnesota Department of Management and Budget every 3 years. The City of Minneapolis is required to submit the report by January 31st, 2015, using compensation and employee data effective at the end of last year. The pay equity law establishes 3 tests for compliance. The first test is called the underpayment ratio test, and it determines if males and females are paid comparably for work of similar value. The test requires a job analysis system that fairly assigns value, that's points, and that those points be used to measure whether or not the employees, based on gender counts of job classes, are paid similarly. A ratio for this test of at least 80 is required to pass. The city passes this test with a score close to 81. The salary range test is the next test, and it compares the number of years it takes for females and males to reach the maximum salary for a position. A percentage of at least 80% is required to pass this test, and the city passes this test with a score of 85.87. The last test is called the Exceptional Service Pay Test. This one compares the number of female classifications receiving exceptional service pay. We call our exceptional service pay longevity. Merit pay would also be a factor there, and it's a count, and it's compared to the number of male classes receiving the pay. A percentage of at least 80% is required to pass the test. The city passes the test with a score of 81.85. As indicated by the above analysis, the City of Minneapolis is in compliance with the Local Government Pay Equity Act. We expect the Minnesota Department of Management and Budget to find the same and notify us of our compliance later this year. The pay equity rules require the governing body of each jurisdiction to review and approve the submission for the Pay Equity Implementation Report. Therefore, we are here today to request your approval for the submission.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nelms. Anyone have any questions about the Pay Equity Report? Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. These things are always a little bit hard for me to understand because it looks like there's a lot of formulas and things, but I'm just curious about what would happen, like our underpayment ratio is 80.96. What happens if it went down to 79? What does non-compliance mean? What are the risks?
Council President Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, there is an administrative penalty for non-compliance. The state generally gives a jurisdiction opportunity to bring it into compliance before levying such a penalty, but the penalty can be substantial as a percentage of LGA. I can't remember the exact percentage. I think it can be as much as 5%.
And I'm just wondering what would a perfect score be, and how would we, the way it looks to me is if it's lower, that's worse, and if it's higher, it's got to be better. So if we had absolute equity, would that be the score of 100?
Council President Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, a perfect score for passing this test is 80 or higher. If you had a higher score up to 100, you gave the example of a score of 100, that would give a, again, perfect score, because anything above 80 would be a perfect score. It's a pass or fail test. It's not, there's not a qualitative value to this test. And it would give us, I guess, a sense of more breathing room, that the analysis wasn't as close as a test score of perhaps 81 would be. I don't know I hope that answers your question.
Well, I guess I maybe would disagree. I know that, I mean, I'm not sure what breathing room means if it doesn't mean have more equity or better equity if it's a higher number. I know last time we looked at it, the number for the statistical analysis test was 87, and now it's 80.9. So to me, it seems like we're moving further away. I think there's reason to be concerned. Also, when you look at the underpayment ratio, the percentage below predicted pay for female classes is 93.47%. So that, just to a layperson reading that, it looks like we're now have a higher percentage we're underpaying than we were 2 years ago when we took the test. And I'm curious about the 304. It says the average difference in pay from predicted pay for female jobs is $301. Does that mean we're paying them $301 more than we would predict, or $301 less?
Council President Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, the pay equity test is a very sensitive test, and it actually, the first test, you mentioned the 3 tests, and let me take them each one at a time, and this will be kind of the quick answer, and if you need more information, I'd be happy to meet with you and explain it more closely, but let me see if I can explain it quickly at a high level, okay? The first test, which is the underpayment ratio test, you pointed out that we have what looks like a drop or reduction in competitiveness relative to the minimum scoring passing test score of 80 in this test. It's true that our last submission in 2012 had a score of 87. I did a quick look I haven't really delved into the differences in terms of the numbers, but it's a very sensitive test, and actually small numbers of job classes moving or changing places can affect the regular number. We do try to avoid going into noncompliance by simply being very consistent about our classification analysis, being accurate with our classification studies and the valuation there, and putting a salary schedule, attaching it to each job without regard to what the gender may potentially be in the future, so that if we have equity across the board with all of our jobs, the chances of us not conforming to the Pay Equity Act would be unlikely. That being said, I did look at the numbers to see what might be different from this time to the last time, and I did find something rather interesting. In the 2012 report, I looked at the appointed pay plan, and the reason I looked at the appointed pay plan is that is an area where we have a lot of individual incumbents jobs that have just one person in a job class. And in this test, a job class counts as a ping or a dot or a count either for us or against us just because of the job class. It is not with regard to the number of incumbents that the job class has. Right. So if you have what was previously a male-dominated job that converts to a female-dominated job, you might end up with a different result ultimately in the test. In 2012, the appointed pay plan had 92 appointed employees. Of those, 36 were female and 52 were male, and we had 2 balanced classes, and the balanced classes really don't count for us at all. They just drop out of the analysis completely. In 2015, we had 103, this submission, we have 103 appointed employees, so an increase of 11. We have now 46 females in those jobs and 55 males in that job. So we had a net increase of female-dominated jobs of 10. And as it turns out, our appointed pay plan is currently underpaid. We know that from our own internal assessments and valuations based on surveys. And if we hire more females into leadership positions that are not adequately paid compared to the rest of the jobs in the city, this kind of a result may be reflected in a test as sensitive as this. So I hope that might point to, and I I can't say that specifically that accounts for all of the point difference, but it may, and it may account for, other things may account for that. If we make individual decisions about market exceptions, that impacts this test.
Well, and I'm not expecting to drill down into and figuring out how to explain all these differences in numbers. First, I just want to try to interpret this in the big picture perspective. So when the average difference in pay from predicted pay for female jobs is $301, does that mean that's $301 more than we would have predicted, or $301 less than what had been predicted? The average difference in pay for male jobs is $17, and I'm unclear if that means we're paying them an average difference more $17 than we would have predicted. So I just want to be clear about what that number means.
The T-test results test. What that means is that the female-dominated jobs, based on their points and based on the male-dominated line that this test generates, should predict a pay of $300, $301 more than what is actually being received.
Okay, so to me that's somewhat concerning. And then when I look at the salary range test, the average years of maximum salary for male jobs is 4.8, and for female jobs is 5.6. So it takes females longer to get to the maximum salary. So that's also concerning, even though that's 85%. So that's, I guess, perfect or passing. Then the service pay test is only 81, and again, it looks like the males come out ahead of that. So just looking at the whole thing, it looks like in most of the measures we've gone down over the 2 years for whatever reason. It also looks like we hire more men, they get promoted more quickly, and they get paid more than the women. And I think that it's okay to name that and to look at this. I know that it's going to help us much more when we can actually get our affirmative action plan and we can actually get the full study refreshed. And I'm hoping that we'll be getting that in the next few years so we can kind of look at what's the market and what's the whole mix of all our job classes and all our positions. But I just, from my point of view, it would have been great if some of these numbers had gone up and they weren't getting closer to 80, but they were getting closer to 100. And so I think it's something we have to watch, and it's really hard from a city council position to watch or know or think what's going on. And I think in the last 2 or 3 years I've been here, this is only the second time we've got to touch this at a committee. The last thing I'm curious about is how do we rate in terms of this test, and can we get access to other peer cities? So are we similar to Hennepin County? Do they have to do this same kind of test? Is that public information? Are we similar to St. Paul? Because it would be more concerning to me if we suddenly looked at our peers and it looked like they were doing what I would say much better, or there was they scored higher in these equity measures that the law set up. So can we get access to those reports from other cities and counties and jurisdictions?
Councilmember Gordon, yes, that's public information. Yes, the other local jurisdictions, including counties, are required to report. I don't know if they're reporting this year. It's a 3-year cycle, so they may be on a different cycle. Those jurisdictions use other classification methods, and we have like the CRESIP system, and I don't know what the county uses or what the city of St. Paul uses. So the comparability there might be somewhat difficult. I can tell you that we compare the rates of pay that we pay our job classifications to Hennepin County and the city of St. Paul, and we're comparable to them in terms of their compensation for similar work. I don't know what their valuation system might have placed those jobs at. That's a whole different angle to this, because everybody has their own classification system, and it's the classification value versus the compensation that's really being looked at here. So are we competitive with them? Are we paying similarly or the same or better? Yes. Would their score be higher, and does that matter to us? I don't know, and I'm not sure.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. And I'm not trying to be judging anybody or anything that we're doing or anything. I just want to acknowledge that historically, government and the United States is male-dominated, male-privileged, and I just think that if we can play a role in fixing that and monitoring that and looking at that, I suspect that the council would like to help play that role, and probably all of you would too. So that's what motivated me anyway, and I appreciate the information.
Any further discussion? If not, I actually would like to point out that the city of Minneapolis was held up as a model last year. We adopted pay equity many years ago, and we're asked to testify at the legislature because the legislature was considering in past requiring people that have contracts with the state of Minnesota to comply with pay equity requirements. And we testified at the legislature. I personally went over there. I was asked by the speaker to do so because we were a pioneer in this field. So I think I want to thank our human resources staff for all the work that they've done over the years on this. And you know, I think it is interesting, as Ms. Nelm said, this goes again to our appointed, the challenge we have in our appointed ranks with compensation, and it's something this council is going to have to grapple with this year and see, you know, how this impacts exactly this kind of work. So thank you, and with that, I will move to submit the 2014 pay equity report to the State Department of Management and Budget. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Next, we have a matter that's to be discussed in closed session, so I'm going to move to adjourn us to 3:15 City Hall for a closed session of the Executive Committee for the purpose of discussing several items under the labor negotiations banner. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval say aye, and we'll adjourn to 3:15. All in approval say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.